Whiti te ora, whiti te ora. Kai ki runga ke ki raro he tupua he tahito whānau hara mai te tō ki o haumi e. Hui e, taiki e. This week on The Hui.
Māori are protesting outside of Parliament, but what about Māori inside the Cabinet?
You know, I try to be persuasive and try to be convincing of my colleagues. Some of these matters have been predetermined by coalition agreements.
How much influence does Tama Potaka really have?
So your colleagues are just not listening. Is that what's happening? Te hunga kua rongo I te karanga rāhui roa haramai, haere. Tātou kei te pita ora, ti hewa Māori ora, and welcome back to The Hui. Tama Potaka has a lot on his plate as Minister for Māori Development, Whānau Ora, Māori Crown Relations, Conservation and Associate Minister for Housing. So I sat down with the Minister in Matangireia, the old Māori Affairs Select Committee room in Parliament last Thursday. E te minita tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe kei taku rangatira.
Thank you for your time. Your office is talking about a couple of things you want to talk about, particularly some of the successes of this government. One of them is tax cuts. Why would you want to talk about tax cuts to a Māori audience?
I think it's important for us to get the economy back on track. Not just the New Zealand economy, but Māori economy as well. And part of that is making sure that the money we earn as salary earners stays in our pockets and doesn't get given to the government or anyone else. And I think that part of recalibrating, revitalising our economy is making sure that tangata Māori and tangata tiriti, the tangata of Aotearoa, have a bit more discretionary spending. One of the most important ways to achieve that is ensuring that tax is dealt to in the appropriate way and that there are tax cuts. The money that you've been earning, you keep rather than it just going to the government, because we believe that ultimately you probably know the best way to spend your money and how to use that.
Let me be honest. People I talk to, they don't give a stuff about tax cuts.
Kapai.
They hear you and the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance talking about tax cuts and they just see this.
Kapai.
Because, to use a phrase, they think tax cut, protein bars and rice.
Yeah.
That's what they do.
But those same people are probably saying, e ngau ngā reiti, e ngau ngā tāke. So when we take action on that, we're actually getting right to the heart of the issue, is that if you're working, you should be entitled to keep as much of your putea as you've earned, rather than letting the government spend
that on the ground? Is that what people are saying to you? They want to talk to you about tax cuts?
They want to talk to me about a number of things.
Is tax cuts really one of them? Because I don't hear that.
It is, but you should come to Kirikiri or Ki Te Uru more often. Come to Hamilton West.
Here's what people I talk with say, right? They don't talk about tax cuts. They want to talk about the tiriti.
Cool.
Treaty principles. Te reo. They want to talk about housing. They want to talk about things like maka, right? Those are the issues that are percolating in people's minds. So I know that's the government line, that you're saying that people should have the ability to do what they want with more dollars in their pocket, right? But the things that Māori talk about are things like te tiriti. So if you don't mind, I kind of want to raise this.
Yeah.
Because I'm really keen to see what you think. Because it has been said, and your Prime Minister has said, that Māori ceded sovereignty. When did Māori do that?
Well, first of all, I just want to address the first thing. We came in on the basis of election promises around getting the economy back on track, restoring law and order, and delivering public services better. There are a number of coalition agreements that were reached as well on a number of things, but certainly, in my view, it's absolutely fundamental for us to get the economy sorted, law and order back on track, health, education, housing. There are a range of other matters which you've raised, which I think we've reached a lot of coalition agreements around, and our coalition is progressing some of those things.
Yep.
So
I get
that's the first thing.
But to be fair, this is an issue that has been talked about a lot. It is still being talked about. The Prime Minister has said that Māori ceded sovereignty. I'm just trying to talk to you.
Yes.
When did Māori cede sovereignty?
I think what my recollection of the Prime Minister saying over the last few weeks is that the Crown is sovereign.
Therefore, Māori ceded sovereignty.
There's been a cession of sovereignty.
When?
That's what the Prime Minister has said.
Yeah. When did Māori cede?
And I support the Prime Minister.
Okay, you tell me when Māori ceded sovereignty.
Well, what I'm going to say is this: is that that's a debate and a discussion in a quarter that's been going on for several decades. Right here and now.
I'm just asking.
Yeah, I know you're just asking me, but right here and now, I'm not engaging in the debate apart from to support the Prime Minister that the Crown is sovereign. But what I'm engaging on are the needs.
This is the problem. You've got
a leader of a coalition government partner in the ACT Party with a Treaty Principles Bill who talks about things like setting the record straight. And I'm just trying to get you to set the record straight with us, because you believe Māori ceded sovereignty.
I support the view of the Prime Minister, which is the Crown is sovereign. But what I also support, and you know this by just looking around this room, Mātangi Rea, is that there is an absolute protection and support for tino rangatiratanga, which preserved well before the treaty was signed and well before the whakaputanga was signed. And that notion of tino rangatiratanga will be upheld.
I'm just asking a simple question. When did Māori cede sovereignty? And how did they do that?
Well, there's been a number of different views on that.
You just tell me.
There's been a number of different views on that.
There are Māori who want to know from you when and how Māori ceded sovereignty.
Yes, and there's a number of different views on that, and I'm not going to entertain that in a very tight discussion.
What your view? I'm just asking your view.
But I've said to others who have asked me that question, I've said, what kind of discussion do you want to have? Do you want to have a discussion?
The discussion is asking you a question of when and how.
But do you want to have a discussion about radical, absolute, titular de jure, de facto sovereignty? What are you actually talking about? Because
I just asked you.
There's a number of discussions caught up in that. What I'm really focused on are the needs of Māori. One of which is to have better housing. That's why I've gone all out making sure that a whole range of people, including hundreds of Māori kids, are brought out of emergency housing. That's the here and now that I have to deal with. Now, the discussions about sovereignty are very important discussions. They're absolutely critical discussions. But my responsibility in this coalition government is to undertake and deliver on the Māori Development, housing and other responsibilities that I have.
Now, and they're going, here he goes again. This is what they're saying. You're not answering the question.
Well,
it's a pretty simple question. And I know you're saying you don't want to entertain it.
No.
But the simple thing is, you believe it, you agree with it. As Māori, as someone who is in this government, you are representing Māori in this government. I'm just asking the question, when and how?
Well, look, that's not a short conversation. That's quite an extended conversation.
No, and I don't think standing right there, right?
Yes.
Te tiriti o Waitangi, right? Article 1 says kawanatanga, right? Was that the cession of sovereignty in your...
Ko te tuatahi says kawanatanga. Article 1 says something else, as you know. And we are dealing with a bilingual, bicultural kawanata tapu.
And I'm talking about te tiriti, he tika tau, ko te tuatahi, ko te kawanatanga. Was that the cession of sovereignty? Because it's definitely not te tuarua.
There's a very long conversation about something that we cannot answer with comprehensively.
Okay, so was it in te tuatahi? Was that where sovereignty was ceded?
Sovereignty, as a word, is not in te tuatahi, but it is in Article 1.
No, but in te tuatahi it says te kawanatanga. So
that's what it says.
Was that the cession of sovereignty?
Well, that's a long conversation we can't have. What I'm really focused on, though, are the needs of Māori communities and the absolute focus to get these inequalities of opportunity that we face, health, education, housing, economic, social, sorted. That's what I can focus on today.
If that's the fact, then why did your Prime Minister negotiate a coalition government and a coalition with the ACT Party leader to talk about the Treaty Principles Bill and allow that to happen? If you're so focused on outcomes for Māori and health and education, something as sacrosanct as the tiriti, how is it he allowed that to occur, that a Treaty Principles Bill will be put to Parliament?
Well, that's something that I hope that you can put to the Prime Minister. I was not involved in those conversations because they are well above my pay grade.
But you're saying to me now that we need to be focused on these things, and what people are talking about at the Treaty Principles Bill.
Those are the things that I'm focused on. I also know the position of the Prime Minister and the National Party vis-a-vis the Treaty Principles Bill, which is we have agreed to take that bill through Select Committee, first reading Select Committee, and we will vote it down at the second reading.
If that does not happen, will you resign?
I'm absolutely committed to supporting the Prime Minister's statement and commitment that when the Principles Bill goes through first reading Select Committee, National will vote it down at the second reading.
Well, National also said we would be talking about things like this before the election. It wasn't part of the campaign, and here we are talking about it now. So if it gets to a second reading, will you resign or will you cross the floor?
That's been agreed within the National Party that we will vote it down in the second reading.
I'm just asking, Minister, will you cross the floor? Will you resign if it goes to a second reading?
We will vote it down.
Okay, another question you won't answer. That's fine. I get it.
I've answered it.
Okay.
Kia ora mai anō. We go back now to our interview with Tama Potaka, which took place on the day Whakaata Māori announced jobs were going. And Erica Stanford cut $30 million from Te Reo Māori funding to put into maths.
Let me ask then about te reo.
Te reo, yes.
Ko koe te reo ko koe. Right, now I think that's a fair statement to say. Ko te reo mātāmua. We had Māori Language Week last week, you and the Prime Minister were promoting Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori last week on social media. Why then has $30 million been cut from Te Reo Māori teaching to fund maths?
Well, I think that there have been some tough decisions that have been made by various ministers as to how they use their and focus their various appropriations. My understanding, in particular of that issue, is that there have been decisions made around the teaching of Te Reo Māori with various teachers who do not have the skills or knowledge in this space. What I'm also very aware of is monies have been devoted to creating a number of Māori language resources that currently do not exist within the education sector, and I'm mihi out to and acknowledge the Minister of Education, the Manu Mātauranga, Erica Stanford, for her commitment in that space. I also have to acknowledge her absolute intention to tautoko support structured literacy, phonics training, and a number of other things in Te Reo Māori. So the work that she's doing and across the education is very keen to uplift Māori achievement.
Okay, let me put the question this way then. Do you support $30 million being cut from Te Reo Māori teaching to support work for maths in schools? Do you support the cut?
I support the Minister of Education making decisions around ensuring that Māori achievement in education is elevated.
Right, so you support the cut?
I support the Minister of Education.
So you support, I'm just saying, do you support $30 million being cut from Te Reo Māori teaching? Yeah, we just had Māori Language Week last week.
Yes.
It's not a good look for a government to then cut $30 million from Te Reo Māori teaching, is it?
Well,
I can understand that.
That's something that's been led by the Minister of Education. But my understanding is that a lot of that money will be devoted to
but the reason why
improving the achievement.
The reason why I asked is because I said, like I said, koe te reo, ko te reo ko koe.
Yeah, and we continue.
And so you support that. You support $30 million. After Māori Language Week, you support that happening.
No, what I've said all along is this, is that we continue to support Te Reo Māori initiatives throughout our government, but particularly with the uplift in funding with Te Matatini, with the monies that have been committed through the various entities like Te Mātāwai and Te Māngai Pāho and others. Now, the decisions have been made in the education space and they're geared towards ensuring we have an increase in achievement by Māori and all New Zealander kids in schools.
Okay, you mentioned Te Matatini, and as you said, $19 million a year for the next 3 years for Te Matatini.
Correct.
That's the support that you've given in the budget. If that's the case, why didn't you then also support the previous government's payout of $8 million over 2 years for Whakaata Māori? Why didn't you inject further cash there? Because it's the same thing, right?
Yes and no.
What's the no bit? Tell me the no bit.
Well, let's get to the yes bit first. We can see that the level of funding for Whakaata Māori today is much higher than it was when Whakaata Māori got going many years ago. It's much higher than when the previous national government was in. There have been several injections of pūtea by the previous government.
$8 million, 2 years.
Well, I think it's a lot more than that across Te Reo Māori initiatives, a lot more than that.
Well, I'm just talking about Whakaata Māori though, right?
Well, there's been changes. There's been changes in the funding. So some funding that was with Te Māngai Pāho previously has moved over to Whakaata Māori directly. There's also been an increase of Māori broadcasting generally. What we also saw in the previous government was a whole bunch of wastage trying to set up the Aotearoa public media entity. That money was just spent, gone, never established.
So just come back to Whakaata Māori though, right?
Yep.
Why fund Te Matatini the way that you have? Supported by Te Matatini, of course,
yes.
And not do the corresponding thing with Whakaata Māori, which is similar to what Labour did with Te Matatini and Whakaata Māori when it was in government.
Well, I think what we saw with the previous government is not a pathway that we necessarily are going to travel all of the time. There are some decisions that have been made, there's some funding that's available, and we continue to fund Whakaata Māori at the same level as has been funded in the previous years. There were some additional monies that were given over and above the baseline.
Okay, so when you say that it's at the same level, aside from the additional money, you know that's not the same level, right?
Well, let me put it in another way. The forecast budget from previous governments around the level of funding for various Māori entities remains.
So we're aware that there are changes at Whakaata Māori. Jobs are being lost. And across the media sector, yes, but at Whakaata Māori. Right?
Yes.
As the Minister for Māori Development, what do you say to those people who are losing their jobs at Whakaata Māori now because you haven't matched and corresponded the same as you have with Te Matatini across to Whakaata Māori and its funding?
Well, I don't think necessarily we're comparing apples with apples or apples with oranges, but what I'd say to those people is that I really appreciate the mahi that you have been doing to uplift and elevate te reo Māori and broadcasting across our communities, and genuinely acknowledge the contribution that you've made to the uplift in te reo Māori. There have been some hard decisions that have been made at the budget. There's a lot of advocacy that is going to be taking place going forward to the next budget, and I hope that we can work together with the Manuputia, Nicola Willis, to ensure that sustainable funding is preserved.
Do you support Māori wards on councils?
Māori wards on councils? I think Māori wards of councils have been absolutely phenomenal in contributing to not only diversity across councils, but also the...
So you support them? You support them?
I support the success of Māori ward councillors on councils. There's been a lift. There's been an increase in the number of Māori that are on councils. And I think in many councils, they've been very contributive to decision-making, those councillors that have been elected from Māori wards. But there is a position that has been reached by way of the coalition agreement around the ongoing
get that?
and enduring function of Māori wards.
No, get that. I'm just trying to see, do you agree with Māori... I'm not trying to trap you, Minister. I'm just trying to ask, do you agree with Māori wards on councils? Do you support them?
No, the party has a position that's...
I'm not asking about the party, I'm asking about you.
I'm part of a party. And a part of a coalition government, and the coalition government has reached a view around Māori wards on councils. If the constituents agree that there should be a Māori ward, then they should...
Through the referendum?
Well, some have and will not be going through a process. But I encourage everyone to participate in voting in that process, and I certainly hope to see more Māori councillors on councils.
But those that have to go through a referendum process, I mean, your Prime Minister said recently that he wants councils to stop focusing and wasting money on nice-to-haves, on getting outcomes. Why are they being forced to go to a referendum when they've already made their position clear, they want their Māori wards?
Well, you know, I recognise that a number of councils have, many councils actually, have said that they want to preserve Māori wards, but the coalition government has come to a view...
They're being forced to a referendum. It's a waste of money.
Yeah, well, look, I appreciate those views, but the coalition government has progressed that legislation through Parliament, and now Parliament has spoken.
Hoki mai anō. In the final part of our interview with Tama Potaka, we talk housing.
Do you agree with your ministerial colleague in Bill English's report that said that the Kainga Ora board was asleep at the wheel?
Look, I think the report stands by itself, and Sir Bill English and his team have made comments and statements and recommendations. I do believe that the housing ecosystem has not been sustainable in the last few years, and Kainga Ora has been a massive part of that ecosystem where it's essentially been given funding, it's operated in a financially unsustainable way, and we need to reset the housing system, recalibrate the housing system so we make sure that there's various houses across the housing continuum and the housing ecosystem that are built.
I understand that, but there are Māori directors who are on that Kainga Ora board that got removed, right? They got wiped out. You know a couple of them directly. Do you agree that they were asleep at the wheel, and indeed does that comport with your knowledge and experience of those Māori directors who are on Kainga Ora that they were asleep at the wheel?
Well, I just want to acknowledge those directors, Māori and others, for their service.
But they were asleep at the wheel.
For their support of social housing.
They were asleep at the wheel and they should have got removed.
Well,
that's what I'm asking.
What I'm saying is that there's a housing ecosystem that hasn't been working very well. Yeah. Kainga Ora has been an unsustainable part of that, the way it's been funded. Kainga Ora, though, has also been absolutely focused on building houses and communities, and some of those communities have really progressed as a result of the mahi of Kainga Ora. So I can talk about, for example, Hamilton or Rotorua or Hastings, where Kainga Ora has been very proactive in building houses, many of which are now being populated by folks coming out of emergency housing.
You mentioned emergency housing, and as you said, I think it's 80% of those who were in emergency housing are now in social housing.
No, I did not say that. What I said is this, is that when we came to office, of all those whānau households, tamariki, that were exiting emergency housing, we knew where about 50% of them were going to.
Right.
As a result of the diligence and hard work of many government officials and others, we now know where around 80% of those whānau and households exiting emergency housing are going to. In 8 or 9 months, we've been able to get better data and better tracking of where people are going to. That's what I've said.
Around 80%. Where are the other 20%, do you think?
Well, there could be a number of reasons why we don't know where other people have gone. They are not obliged to tell us where they are going.
Right.
But what I can say today, and as I've said now, I think knowing where 80% of people are going is better than knowing where 50% are going.
No, sure, I agree. But the concern is, and you would have read this report as well, it was a report out of Coromandel that said that many whānau Māori who couldn't access emergency housing or indeed social housing were living either in cars, tents or mangroves.
We are in an absolute housing catastrophe and crisis right now. Not just those that are in emergency housing, but the many thousands, maybe more, people who are living in very difficult situations, some homeless, some living in mangroves and kale sheds, places like Hokianga, places throughout the Tairāwhiti and East Coast, but everywhere there is some severe housing crisis going on. And part of the reason why we have that is the cost of living and the economic crisis that the country has gone through. So it's incumbent upon myself and others to try and get that economy back on track, and me particularly to try and make sure we reduce the number of households living in emergency by 75% by 2030. We've got to around 60% in 9 months. Blue shoots, we're heading in the right direction, but this is just the start. We've got a whole range of other whānau and households like those that you've described that we have to work hard for and try and figure out solutions for.
If we're tracking so well, why are 300 people losing their jobs at Kainga Ora? Well, many of whom will be in the Māori division, Māori part of Kainga Ora. Why is that happening?
Well, that's an operational matter. That's something that the CEO and ultimately the board of Kainga Ora are addressing rather than myself at the ministerial level.
So you've just said, though, that we're on the right track. So when people hear that and they're losing their jobs, what do you say to them? Because if we're on the right track, why are they losing their jobs? And I'll say, Minister, why is that happening to you?
Well, if you understand the housing ecosystem, part of our mojo and going for housing growth and making sure we've got the right infrastructure, funding and financing, ensuring that the regulatory standards are in place, is to ensure that we have space for growth across social housing as well as affordable renters and buyers and market sellers. And in order to do that, we have to be really clear about where the limited funds that we get through the taxation system and other methods are spent in the right place. Ultimately, the decisions around staff are an operational matter for the CEO, or the kaiwhakahaere of Kainga Ora.
It just seems, this is the right word obviously, weird that the Minister talks about the good progress and tracking that has been made, particularly with relation to emergency housing, and yet 300 people are losing their jobs. It doesn't make sense.
Well, I think that, that's something that's an operational matter at Kainga Ora. One decision that we did make in April was to ensure there was a fast track for whānau with tamariki. As a result of that decision alone, we've been able to see 645 whānau and over 1,300 tamariki leave emergency housing and get into warm, safe, dry homes.
You've talked a lot with me just now about the party and about the coalition government and its arrangements.
Yes.
And I've been trying to ask you questions from you and get you to answer from Tama Potaka. And I know you're part of a party, but you have a role to advocate on our behalf. So when you hear people like Tuka Morgan, who says that we've been thrown in front of the bus and the bus is running us over.
Yes.
And when you hear people like Rahui Papa say, you are not listening to us and also you are not engaging with us. Yes. They say Mecca, for example, the Waitangi Tribunal, saying that Māori need to be engaged in a much better way on issues like marine and coastal area. Yeah. What do you respond with when you hear those comments?
Well, I think those are very genuine and respectful comments that are said with a lot of legacy and said with a lot of support by Māori communities throughout the country. Certainly my responsibilities and roles mean that I try and ensure that I'm going out and listening to people, whether or not that's attending hui, paikai or other types of hui.
But that narrative hasn't changed for a long time, right?
But I have to...
since you've been minister, that narrative hasn't changed. People are saying they're being thrown in front of the bus and the bus is running them over. No. So when people keep raising these issues, as recently as last week, what they could be saying is you're not doing an effective enough job in advocating on our behalf with the coalition government.
You know, I think that's clearly an opinion or a reckon of people if that's what they're saying. Certainly the advocacy that I undertake, and I've said this before, is that I talk with my colleagues. I show them evidence and data about how we can do things better. Emergency housing is a great example of that.
So you're saying that you are advocating?
Absolutely.
In a very robust way?
Absolutely.
With a lot of strength on our behalf. So your colleagues are just not listening? Is that what's happening?
Well, I think we can work harder, and I think that a lot of Māori communities and whānau Māori and iwi and individual tangata Māori are doing it very, very tough. Hence why I do think there's a lot of upside and value in ensuring that we engage with in tautoko whānau ora. We bring in other items like social investment to help generate the types of delivery that we need to ensure the inequalities of opportunity, which I talked about earlier today, are recalibrated.
I guess what I'm asking is, you've talked very much about the party, you talk very much about what the priorities are for your government. People are still saying, though, we need someone to really advocate for us on treaty principles, on te reo, on the tribunal, on MACA, on all these issues that you know people are talking about.
Sure.
Right? How do you do that better?
How can I do that better?
Yeah, because it isn't working at the moment, right?
Well, you know, I try to be persuasive and try to be convincing of my colleagues. Some of these matters have been predetermined by coalition agreements. You know, I was not involved. It's up the food chain. I'm way down on the food chain in terms of leadership discussions and arrangements.
But isn't that the problem, though? When it comes to issues that matter so much to Māori, when we talk about things like the treaty, they matter a lot to us.
Yes, yes.
Isn't that the problem, that you are so far down the food chain that people don't listen or won't listen or can't listen?
Well, I think that's an observation that you and others may make, that Tama's too far down the food chain.
What do you make? I mean, it's your words. You told me that you were too far down the food chain to be effective enough, really, is what you were saying.
No, I continue to be really focused on advocating for the responsibilities that I have as the Māori Development Minister and the Māori Crown Relations Minister, and we can do better. But that's why I try to build those sorts of understandings and māramatanga across my ministerial colleagues, but also across the public service. You know, it's absolutely fundamental for me to make sure that Te Puni Kōkiri is really firing in the statutory responsibilities that it has. Policy around health education, resource development and employment and training, but holding other agencies to account. Most of the funding across government is not dedicated to Māori, but what I do know is this: New Zealand will only become the small, advanced, leading economy that the Prime Minister wants if we fire up, activate and elevate Māori both across economic areas as well as social areas. If we're unable to do that, we will not become a leading small advanced economy, and that's what I'm really focused on.
Te minita tēnā koe. Thank you very much for your time.
And thank you for your time. Ngā mihi ki a koe, engari ki te whānau whānui.
Kia ora maira.
That was Tama Potaka. E ngai iwi, that is our hui for this week. Kia mau, ki te tūranga o taputapu a te haumi e, hui e, taiki e. Nā te puna whakatongarewa, te hui, I tautoko.